Ladies and gentlemen, in this video I'm going to be going over the 5 biggest presidential blowouts in US history. Now I am only going to be including elections that had a total of at least 500 electoral votes. There were many elections in the 17 and 1800s that had less when we had fewer than 50 states that would be considered blowouts, but because in some cases there were significantly less than 50 states involved, I don't think it's right in terms of a modern context to really include them. So these 5 elections are all going to be more recent or modern elections, at least elections within the past 100 years. Coming in at number 5, it was the Democrat Lyndon B. Johnson's 1964 victory over Barry Goldwater. LBJ won 463 electoral votes, good for around 61.1% of the popular vote percentage, winning 44 states. Johnson was running for the first time after taking over for the assassinated John F. Kennedy. He supported the Civil Rights Act in the lead up to the election, and in turn, the election victory gave him a large mandate, enabling the Democrats to pass wide-scale government initiatives like Medicare and Medicaid. Johnson already was a heavy favorite after the Kennedy assassination in '63, but to add insult to injury, Goldwater made statements that led Americans to believe he would be increasingly aggressive in the way of nuclear weapons, which was seen as extremely unpopular. The 1964 election was the first in which the District of Columbia was granted electoral votes and overwhelmingly voted for LBJ. Goldwater did have some Southern support, winning 5 deep South states in Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina, along with his home state of Arizona, just 6 out of the now 51 total states or districts. Moving on to the number 4 biggest U.S. presidential election blowout of the recent modern time, it is Ronald Reagan's first victory in 1980 over Jimmy Carter, who was the incumbent at the time. Reagan won 489 electoral votes. It was a record victory over an incumbent, heavily fueled by the recent stagflation the United States was experiencing. Reagan also presented himself significantly better than Carter during debates and promised economic revival to combat the stagnant GDP. Carter's administration was also mired in the Iran hostage crisis, which weakened the U.S. on a global stage and lasted for over a year. An election landslide like this, where the incumbent loses by so much, would only happen under pressurized economic conditions, which is what we saw in the 1980 election. Moving on to number 3 on the list of biggest U.S. election blowouts, it was the 1972 election, the Republican Richard Nixon running as the incumbent against the Democrat George McGowan. Nixon won 520 electoral votes, winning 49 states, losing only the District of Columbia and Massachusetts, so he lost one single state. He won 60.7% of the popular vote. Nixon already had a built-in advantage running as a popular incumbent, boasted on a strong economy and a soft withdrawal from the Vietnam War. McGovern, on the other hand, chose a VP that had to withdraw due to mental health concerns, and his campaign really never got off the ground. The initial Watergate scandal happened months before the election on June 17, 1972, but initially was a non-factor when it came to public opinion, as shown by the result of the shocking landslide victory. It is funny to think, in the context of modern time, supposedly one of the biggest scandals in US presidential history happening months before an election and having virtually zero impact on the actual election. A surprise in terms of the results comes from Richard Nixon's unexpected support among young voters. McGovern was expected to win many of them due to his staunch anti-war stance, but Richard Nixon secured nearly half of votes from first-time voters that were under the age of 39. Moving on up to number 2 on the list in terms of the biggest election blowouts, it is Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1936 election landslide victory. defeating Alf Landon, winning 523 electoral votes, good for around 60.8% of the popular vote. Landon, the Republican nominee from Kansas, won only 2 states, Maine and Vermont. The election solidified the New Deal coalition, in which beckoned in programs like Social Security and unemployment benefits. The election was taking place during the heart of the Great Depression, and LBJ provided a solution. FDR was also running on the back of a 1932 election blowout against former Republican incumbent Herbert Hoover. That was also a landslide victory to a lesser extent, with Roosevelt winning 472 electoral votes. Landon was really up against it, and it was reported, according to a previously respected pollster, that Landon, based off of their polling that they had done, was going to win. Of course, that did not come to pass. And moving on to number 1, the biggest election blowout. It is Ronald Reagan once again, this time running for re-election in 1984 against Walter Mondale. Reagan won 525 electoral votes, winning 58.5% of the popular vote. He famously won every state outside of narrowly losing Minnesota, which was Mondale's home state. Reagan, like every Republican, also lost the District of Columbia. Reagan had recently brought inflation down under his first term, along with skyrocketing U.S. GDP. His large incumbent advantage was only boosted by his skilled marketability, easily dispatching of Mondale in the second debate. Most impressively, Reagan was able to win over standard unionized Democrats, not just independents, which ballooned his numbers to extreme landslide territory. Mondale's pledge to raise citizen taxes at the DNC was not taken too kindly, and in the summer of 1984, there was already a Reagan landslide expectation, with him leading a Gallup poll by over 19%. We will likely never see anything this close in terms of a blowout victory in a U.S. presidential election. The most notable reason, the demographic change because of immigration, ironically in part because of the amnesty that Reagan signed, along with increased tribalism, in part because of social media.